Let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at the case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan, a scholar who faced legal actions simply for forwarding academic articles online. But here's the twist. Our source material today doesn't look at this through your standard legal or political lens. No, it analyzes the entire event purely as a fascinating psychological phenomenon. What we're actually seeing here is a massive collision between two totally different stages of human psychological maturity.
To really grasp this analysis, we need to talk about developmental psychology. Think of it as our lens for looking at how both people and institutions grow. Development isn't just about kids getting taller. It's the hardcore, scientific study of how our minds, our morals, and our identities literally evolve over our entire lifespan. And the absolute key argument from the sources is that institutions and societal systems go through these exact same developmental stages.
Here's the roadmap for this explainer. 1. A psychological clash. 2. Cognitive mismatch. 3. Moral development differences. 4. Identity and conformity. 5. The developmental discontinuity. And finally, 6. A societal mirror.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, a psychological clash beyond the legal arguments.
So the core idea here is that institutions have developmental stages just like you and me, and this case is a structural collision between them. See, Dr. Chen defended himself using incredibly complex scientific theories, which the judicial system just viewed as a refusal to confess or even outright malice. But the source material tells us this isn't about the traditional idea of right and wrong. It's what they call a developmental mismatch. You've got one entity operating at this highly mature, abstract level, slamming headfirst into a system operating at a much earlier, way more rigid stage of psychological development.
Moving to Section 2, cognitive mismatch, how we process reality. To understand this, we're going to step onto the first rung of our psychological ladder, cognitive development, using Jean Piaget's famous theories. Piaget's framework maps out how human thinking progresses. We all start simple, right? In the concrete operational stage, we rely on direct experience. We need rigid rules. Things are either black or white, true or false. Next, we graduate to formal operational, where we start using abstract logic. But the absolute peak of adult cognitive development is post-formal thought. This is where you actively embrace complexity, you accept that uncertainty exists, and you can comfortably look at multiple conflicting systems all at once. And this brings us to our first major mismatch. The analysis highlights that in his defense, Dr. Chen was bringing in some seriously advanced concepts, like Gödel's incompleteness theorem and complex systems theory. He's clearly operating with post-formal reasoning, but the system evaluating him, it's using a rigid, binary framework. It just wants to know, did you forward the article? Yes or no? Is it true or false? It relies entirely on linear, concrete categorization. So they aren't even having the same conversation. It's a fundamental structural cognitive gap. Which leads us to Section 3, moral development differences, judging right from wrong. For this, we're going to use the classic moral development framework by Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg basically shows us how our sense of morality evolves over time. At the bottom, the pre-conventional level, you're just doing what you're told to avoid getting punished. Simple as that. Step up to the conventional level, which, by the way, is where most of society lives, and your motivation is obeying authority, following the law, and keeping social order. But if you reach the top, the post-conventional level, things shift. You are now motivated by universal ethical principles. You're driven by an internal conscience and the pursuit of truth, even if that truth clashes with conventional rules. Put them side by side, and the moral contrast is totally stark. The sources argue that Dr. Chen's refusal to just confess and play along isn't stubbornness. It's driven by his internal principles, a deep commitment to academic truth and logic. He is operating at that post-conventional peak. The judicial system, on the other hand, evaluates him purely on external conventional rules. To the institution, morality equals maintaining order and obeying authority, full stop. So when Dr. Chen acts out of a higher ethical principle, the system literally has no choice but to process it as disobedience. Let's look at Section 4, identity and conformity, how we see ourselves. For our third psychological lens, we're diving into psychosocial identity, using the stages defined by Erik Erikson. Erikson believed that as we mature, we stop just playing whatever roles society hands us, a stage he called role conformity. Instead, we build a stable, internal sense of who we are. And eventually, highly mature adults strive for generativity. This is a profound desire to create lasting value, to give back to future generations, and to author your own historical identity, rather than just chasing a quick pat on the back from society. Once again, the analysis reveals a massive divide. Dr. Chen is focused on long-term historical meaning. He couldn't care less about the immediate external label of defendant. His identity is locked in as a scholar and truth seeker, aiming for generativity. The institution, completely locked into immediate role conformity. It absolutely needs everyone to play their assigned parts. The prosecutor prosecutes, the defendant confesses. The institution evaluates its own success based strictly on how well everyone sticks to those external roles.
All right, Section 5, the developmental discontinuity, the core thesis.
Let's tie all these scientific lenses together to understand the core thesis of this explainer, which is a concept called developmental discontinuity. This idea is huge. It states that when a system at a lower developmental stage encounters a mind at a higher stage, misinterpretation isn't just likely, it is completely inevitable. A system running on binary logic and strict obedience literally lacks the psychological hardware to comprehend post-formal reasoning and universal ethics. It just doesn't compute. Let's look at how this builds into a complete picture. This synthesis brilliantly maps out our three pillars. Look across the dimensions, cognitively, morally, and in terms of identity. You can see exactly where the individual and the system completely miss each other. They are speaking two entirely different psychological languages. Dr. Chen is living in a world of complex systems, universal principles, and historical meaning. Meanwhile, the system is strictly dealing in binary rules, absolute authority, and external control.
And here is the tragic result of that mismatch. The institution inherently views higher-level, complex thinking as a threat. It sees it as an anomaly that has to be corrected. Because the system simply cannot comprehend the higher stage, it translates those actions downward into its own lower stage vocabulary. So Dr. Chen's highly complex academic skepticism, the system processes that as malice. His moral independence? That gets officially documented as disobedience or a refusal to repent. You see, it's not even necessarily a malicious misreading by the system. It is a structural limitation of its own psychological development.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, a societal mirror, the broader takeaway.
Let's zoom out for a second, because this analysis forces us to ask a really vital question. What happens when citizens climb higher on the developmental ladder than the very systems designed to govern them? Think about it. When individuals reach post-formal thought and post-conventional morality, how does a society that's still operating at a conventional level react? Does it crush those people just to maintain order? Or does it somehow find a way to evolve its own institutional maturity? I love this phenomenal quote, which is inspired by Erik Erikson's work. It says, "True maturity is not conforming to the world, but understanding it with your own light." That perfectly captures the psychological stance of someone who has reached the absolute peak of cognitive and moral integration. It's a great reminder that at the highest levels of human development, conforming is no longer the goal. The real goal is to illuminate the world with your own self-authored, rigorously examined understanding of what is true. So as we close out this explainer, I want you to consider this. Is the true test of a civilization not just the strictness of its laws, but its psychological capacity to let that light shine? When an institution encounters a mind that has genuinely outgrown its rules, its response tells us exactly where that institution stands on the ladder of human development. It leaves us with a pretty profound question. How on earth do we build systems mature enough to understand the most developed among us?